So 4 years ago, I got a chance to listen to your talk. Really didn't know you, didn't know too much about the work. And I heard you say that what you were able to accomplish in your studies of psilocybin for end-of-life palliative care, you were able to accomplish things that would normally take you several years of psychotherapy in the matter of a few sessions. And, I was aware of some of the personal transformative effects of the psychedelics, but that was at the time when the research was just coming out really strongly in favor. And a lot has gone on from then, but I wanted to go back to those moments where, you've been in this field, dedicated your life to it, and now all of a sudden you had an amazingly powerful tool at your disposal to start to work with.
So, did I say that a couple of years ago?
You said that.
That's a good quote. We've been privileged. I've been privileged to work with people with, so the study you're referring to is a study with patients with cancer, many with advanced cancer, some in remission, some end of life, and many have passed away since our study concluded. But the main criteria for inclusion in the psilocybin study, and I'll explain the protocol in a few minutes, was that they had a very significant amount of anxiety, existential, spiritual distress, diagnosable by a DSM-5 psychiatric classification system.
Did that yield a number of some sort? A lot of these things yield a kind of a rating on a scale, or?
No, you said endorse that diagnosis. Have enough symptoms to endorse that diagnosis. It was called a SCID. It's an interview that's done. Backing up, I've worked in palliative care for a number of years. It's been an interest of mine professionally. I think for all of us, it's a personal interest, what happens when we die.
Sure.
And it's been with me from an early age. I was interested in death and dying and existential distress. So to participate in this study and to see the results was something, and I hope we get deeper into it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's you were working with people one way, and then in the trial, you got to utilize a lot of the knowledge base that you'd forged from effective methods of communication, but doing it under a much more favorable environment, and an environment where certainly it had to feel like the wind was really at your back at this point. I mean, you were making progress. Like, what was that? Did you have an aha moment where you just saw breakthroughs happening with specific individuals where you're like, whoa?
We did. My first few people I worked with were profoundly, powerfully transformative experiences. That's been published and we've written about and I've spoken about publicly. And these participants were generous enough to allow us to use their narratives, which I have over the years. To backpedal a bit, you made a good point in terms of building upon prior knowledge. Mm-hmm. In two ways. We're standing upon the shoulders of earlier folks in the field. One is standing upon the earlier research with psilocybin and LSD with end-of-life patients in the 50s and 60s, and returning to a body of literature and clinical research protocol that was ended dramatically and suddenly in the mid-60s, early 70s with sociocultural changes. So we have that to lean on, and we'll get into that, I'm certain. And then in terms of palliative care, there are meaning-based psychotherapies. There are a way we speak with people or try to be with people who might be dying. So in terms of breakthrough moments, those sessions are something that is potentially incredible to experience. The second person I work with, who I've spoken about, his profile was, he was profiled in the New Yorker article that Michael Pollan did a while ago. Mm-hmm. And he was a young gentleman in his 50s. That's young when you're our age, right?
Sure.
He's young. And had a very difficult cancer, metastatic, passed away soon after the study was over. And had an experience that was just incredible. And what he let us use his narrative, his journal entry. And he spoke about the experience of love that recalibrated how he died. Literally talking about love over and over. That despite his suffering, his cancer, and he had a lovely wife. He has a lovely wife, Lisa. He was not afraid of death, and that this experience of being immersed in eternal love, to use his language, was what helped change him.
Sure.
And that's some words for a scientist to hear, right? I mean, this is a day at the office, and he spoke about being immersed in kind of an eternal, timeless love, beyond personal love. There's interpersonal love, and there's love for self.
Sure.
And then there's this
Capital
larger
L.
cosmic
Yeah.
love, and I always like to use the word agape from the Greek. This kind of divine, almost people describe it as a substance of existence, and to hear that is just incredible. So he, that was a aha moment, like we're on the right track.
I'd say.
There's the people who are suffering tremendously, and it's a gift to have these people experience this, and to one of the main pieces how I think it's transformative is that they identify less with the physical body.
Mm-hmm.
So if your body is failing and you're dying, and this vehicle we have is fading away and beginning to stop, to connect with something more enduring that might not stop when the body stops, or to connect with something outside of biology. Is consciousness outside of biology? Is it what we call non-local consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
To connect with something like that is a profound gift if you're dying.
It's a profound gift if you're not
for any
dying.
of us, exactly. To know that I'm not this body. I'm not this cancer.
Yeah.
This body has cancer, but I might be something different. And we'll talk more about that. That experience of peeling away the layers that could happen in these experiences of identity and of this sense of reality, and connected with something more timeless. And that's a profound way for me to talk, even as a scientist, right?
Undoubtedly.
In a medical school.
I had that experience, fortunately, which set me off on my path. I was a pretty committed atheist when I was growing up. I had a very impactful visit to Italy, in which I got to tour the dungeon of the Inquisition and saw some of the most horrific things and concepts that had ever filled my mind at that point. 11-year-old kid, all of these torture devices done in the name of the church and in the name of the faith. And I'd seen some other downstream negative effects, things that didn't make sense to me from, organized religious structures. And so I, grew angry. I said, this is unjust. And I kind of followed that path, was reading some Hitchens at the time. And then I went out and went to the mountains of New Mexico and experienced psilocybin, and then felt my body melt away, and this thing that remained, which I would now call consciousness, I didn't really have a name for it. And I just looked back and said, oh shit, I got to rethink some things here. I didn't quite have it right. Some of my criticisms maybe had merit, but there's a whole other side here that I'm ignoring. And that moment recalibrated my life. That was that one, fork in the road. Aubrey having done that and Aubrey not having done that. And it's a completely different life. And I'm completely sure that it's a much better path having that piece of knowledge, knowing that I'm more than just this vehicle, more than the emotions, more than the pain, more than whatever else is happening, or the pleasure for that matter. I'm something else beyond that. And
did it change how you view traditions, religions, and spiritual frameworks?
No doubt, because it opened me up to, okay, maybe they got some things wrong, but they may have got some things very right. And at that point, having this mixed bag rather than you're totally wrong, like, oh, okay. And it allowed me to open my eyes and then go deeper and find these wisdoms and these really powerful messages and stories that are at the heart of, really, as far as I can tell, all religions that I've studied.
They are, and it's a great point. And a lot of bad things have been done in the name of religion over the centuries.
Too many, yeah.
And it's, I speak about this often because that becomes the face of how people view religion. And as you poignantly pointed out, there's another side to it.
Yeah.
And if we look at the mystic core of all the religions, there is a mystic core, what Huxley called the perennial philosophy, Aldous Huxley.
Mm-hmm.
And although they have, let's say, the 6 main religions, the 3 Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and the 3 Eastern, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, though there are profoundly different frameworks and symbolic architecture for each one, there is this common mystic core that the perennialists speak about.
Yep.
That we measure in our studies. So our studies use a scale called the mystical experience scale. And the criteria are a sense of unity, profound interconnectedness of all living things and things, a sense of transcendence, transcending this body, this time-space, sacredness, ineffability, words fall short, sacredness. So those are at the core of religions, and each one has its incredibly beautiful tapestry of language. I mean, the Upanishads in Hinduism, the Tao of Taoism, and the way it describes the Ensof of Judaism and the Kabbalah. How the Buddhists describe no self, the nature of self and no self, and sunyata of nothingness. There's even a strain of very important school within mystic Christianity of what's called the apophatic theology. And these are the early Christian mystics who spoke about the nothingness at their heart of being. Very much like the Buddhists and the Zen mystics. Different language, same experience. The nothingness filled with the everythingness, and they speak about it in a beautiful way. But you're right, that gets kind of buried beneath centuries of other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the very core and you see multiple paths up the same mountain.
Yeah.
Beautiful wrought paths with different foliage and different botanicals and different ways and frameworks that you look, different stained glass peering, by which you see the sun. But then, you then look at what's been piled on top of that, and then it can be sometimes monstrous or sometimes misleading. But the core problem with when that happens is when the ties to the direct experiential connection get severed, when you don't have a religion that leads you back to being able to show, not tell. And I think that's the revolution in the Renaissance that we're having, is now we're bringing that back. Like, this isn't a pathway for a select few to find it and talk about it. Like, we want to bring everybody through and let them figure it out. And then whatever interpretation, all of the different interpretations in classical you can appreciate, or choose one or two that you resonate with,
Something does seem afoot.
Something's afoot.
There's something to be kind of a spiritual activism taking place, and it's interesting. But yeah, religions are frameworks. They're portals to connect with the sacred. Yeah. People often ask why they need one. No, you don't need one. You could have that experience in the woods and a variety of ways with nature. But they're helpful frameworks to connect with the sacred that have been around for millennia. They're the earliest attempts to describe the transcendent experience. And we have other models as well. We have science and a lot of models. And I've yet to meet a religious scholar or a profoundly spiritual person, including religious leaders, who don't say, at some point you even go beyond the religion.
Yeah.
I mean, the old famous, if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. That they're frameworks to connect, but ultimately you also go beyond their framework to that transcendence, the ineffable. But that's been lost in many ways. But I think you're onto something. I think something is afoot. We'll see if in 50 years that was true or not.
Well, you're putting shoes on the afoot by doing some of the studies that you're doing. I mean, this is, and I know that there's a limited amount that you can get into because the study's ongoing. But right now you're preparing a study to take religious leaders and offer them an opportunity to take psilocybin and measure the results. What was the idea behind this, and what are you looking to see and measure? Yeah,
so that's a great study. And I want to come back to the cancer study, too, with end-of-life distress and death and consciousness. But so there's a very well-known study in 1962 called the Mars. It was called the Good Friday experiment. I'm sure you know about that. Mm-hmm. It took place in Boston. And Walter Pahnke, who was a minister and psychiatrist, had done this study under the supervision of Timothy Leary, and he had recruited 10 theology students at Marsh Seminary in Boston to take psilocybin, and 10 took placebo. And the 10 who took psilocybin, the majority of them scored very high on the mystical experience measures that we still use today. And it was called back then, quote, the most remarkable experiment in the psychology of religion. And he concluded, Walter Pahnke, that these experiences with a compound were indistinguishable from naturally occurring mystical experiences found throughout the ages by mystics and saints that have been written about in poetry and all the great books of humanity. It was an incredible study, and then, of course, everything came to a halt a couple of years later. And Walter Pahnke tragically died in a scuba diving accident, very young, after a number of years after that study. So this study we're doing now is an FDA-approved study at Johns Hopkins and NYU, enlisting religious leaders, ordained clergy and rabbis, and hopefully people from each tradition, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Islam, to participate in this very controlled study where they could have the opportunity to have a psilocybin experience, a psilocybin-generated mystical experience. There is not one psilocybin experience.
Right.
There isn't even a psychedelic experience. The word gets misused a lot. People say a psychedelic experience. There isn't one psychedelic experience.
It's true.
You have 100 people as psychedelic, you have 100 different experiences. There is a mystical experience, there's a spiritual experience generated by the use of a psychedelic, but there isn't a psychedelic experience, and the word gets used all the time. And so we're hoping to have them help us, help science, map out the landscape, the phenomenology of mystical experience. So this is called basic science, or clinical translational science is using these experiences and this medicine for clinical outcome change. So in the cancer study, could we harness the experience of a mystical experience that we're wired for, and we'll come back to that, are we wired for meaning and why, to help alleviate end-of-life distress? We use it with alcoholism to help stop drinking. It's been used in smoking cessation at Johns Hopkins. This is not a pathological cohort, a sample. These are professional, healthy religious leaders. Basic science tries to understand the nature of something. So they're helping us, through their experience, kind of map out what is this. And it's fascinating. I mean, how will they write about it? Within the framework of their own specific religion? Will they describe it in different ways? Will we see a common ground? Which I imagine we will, a common essence, this mystic core. At the end, could it be interspiritually enhancing in some way? So,
are you going to get them all? Are you going to get them all together at some point after their experiences? And
that's not part of the protocol now, but it's something we're talking about, and everyone has said they would participate so far. So we could add an addendum at the end of the study if they wanted to. They'd have to waive their own confidentiality to do that, but if they wanted to have the opportunity to be with the others and talk about the conversation, that would be stunning if they can do
truly.
That. So,
it's almost really like you think about, if these things had been more available mainstream, you think about the greatest minds, because even with myself, as my mind has evolved and I've gotten more knowledge, my ability to form more interesting, novel connections between fields of study that I've had, and the capability of my hardware to form really cool new ideas and thoughts just increases as my knowledge base increases. You look at the greatest minds that have been around, and these are some of the greatest spiritual minds, and then it's enhancing their innate ability to communicate with different parts of their brain, as well as the mystical experience. It's taking the best and then supercharging them to see what they can find in the ether, and that's incredibly interesting. Just as it would be interesting to find put the greatest quantum physicists, and offer them some of these psychedelics and see if what they can see if they decide to look inside an atom and with their knowledge base and what they're able to form, because it's an interplay between yourself and then the medicine. Neither one is necessarily dominant over the other, and so the results of this could be really, truly groundbreaking.
And it's not the medicine per se, right? These aren't drug studies per se. So every drug study that exists in America, every drug study, for the most part, you get the desired effect while you take the drug. Taken it daily, desired effect, lower blood pressure, reduced depression, whatever the intention of the drug was. These are more like experience studies facilitated by one use of a compound. They take the psilocybin once in our cancer study. It's out of the system in a number of hours. The half-life is relatively short. They go home that night back in ordinary consciousness. But it's that experience that's transformative. Which we seem to be wired for naturally. I mean, throughout time, this happened also spontaneously. So one of the unanswered questions beyond I often joke around, beyond my pay grade is, are we wired for meaning? Why, of course. Why aren't these experiences more common naturally, spontaneously? This is interesting. Why do these, this mushroom, this fungi grow on the planet? When humans eat it, they have this incredible insight into existence or self. Fascinating.
Yeah. Well, what's your, if you were to reach and say, what is it, because your perspective on this might be even better than the average layman at the very least. So what is your perspective on that? Are we wired for meaning? Why are we wired to take a significant moment and use that as a life-altering, transformative experience?
The big question is, it does suggest we're wired for meaning. I mean, clearly we are.
Yeah.
Again, and everyone, Maslow called it a peak experience.
Mm-hmm.
Rudolf Otto called it numinosity, which Jung also used. Carl Jung used the word numinous. Richard Buck, in a great book I recommend to all your listeners, called Cosmic Consciousness, written in 1902,
Whoa.
and influenced William James's classic Varieties of Religious Experience. And I think one of the best books of last century describing this phenomena. And he was a psychiatrist in Canada who had a spontaneous mystical experience. Then wrote this incredible classic book showing how some of the greatest figures of history, from Jesus to Buddha to Spinoza to artists and poets, had these experiences. And then profiles regular people in a contemporary life who had these experiences. And so, as Maslow points out, many people have peak experiences all the time. Children do all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Not a 3-hour intense mystical experience like we have in our studies, but those transient moments of connectedness, unity. And as Alan Watts once pointed out, it's pushed out of our system. It's pushed out of the culture. It's pushed down. There's no framework in which to talk about it.
Yeah.
Right? Huxley has a great book called Island, where it's kind
one
of
my favorite books.
Right?
Shaped my life. Yeah.
But it's an open culture where you speak about the experiences. And so if a 7-year-old has a great experience, he's walking in the woods and he feels kind of, a bit depersonalized and transcendent experience. And does he talk about that? Does he or she talk about that? So that framework is gone. In terms of wired for meaning, it seems we are clearly. These medicines, clearly, reliably, in the right setting, and I want to talk about set and setting, very important for our research, in the right set and setting, in an interpersonally supported environment, do promote or can promote these experiences like those found throughout the ages. It's incredible.
It is.
It's incredible.
Do you fantasize, as someone who's read Island, do you fantasize about a potential move towards a more utopian, culture? Something similar, obviously, but advanced based on the time and technology to Huxley's Island?
When I was 25, yes. Now a little more conservative in my hope for that. But beyond our lifetime, of course, we all hope for an evolution of our compassion. I mean, this is not any breaking news here, but our capacity as humans to both create incredible unspeakable cruelty, and have incredible transcendent experiences is just stunning.
Right.
So, of course, we hope for a continuation of going forward. What I do hope for in a shorter time frame that hopefully I would live to see is like Albert Hoffman's vision, Albert Hoffman, who discovered LSD,
Mm-hmm.
that we have centers in terms of end of life and hospice, where if these medicines are rescheduled down the road after many clinical trials, to where people can go to these centers, have preparation, a number of modalities to prepare for the session, have the session or two, and then return back to their home changed, hopefully changed, and have a better death, what we call a good death in palliative care.
Mm-hmm.
So I do hope for clinical, some clinical realities about this in our lifetime. In terms of the big picture, let's hope.
Let's hope.
Let's hope.
What about if we're talking fantasies, certainly one of mine is to bring spirituality back to a revision of the church concept, where there's places where people can go, not just for clinical indications, but to have real, genuine mystical experiences, which of course can have a variety of clinical benefit. I think the separation of church and state in that regard, the church and body, doesn't really make a lot of sense. A lot of these same things, you could be studying, quitting cigarette smoking, but end up having a mystical experience and what caused what, but yeah, having a place where you can go and reconnect spiritually, because I think that is also another fundamental human drive, is meaning and spirituality. I think those things are entangled, but a place where you can reliably find that, I think would be deeply, deeply impactful and a beautiful thing to be able to offer humanity.
Yeah, and it likely was the genesis of religions. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, Jung calls it an impulse that there's a human impulse for meaning. And he says, and I'm going to mention this tomorrow in my talk, that by religion we don't just mean creed, we mean a change in consciousness that ensued following an experience of numinosity, of mystical experience. And that changes who we are. And then the church, or whatever spiritual lineage it is, provides a framework to stay connected or remind us of that through symbols and beautiful writings. And right, I mean, people don't stay in that experience all the time, but can they act as portals or frameworks to connect with that? That was the genesis, I would argue.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets watered down over the years.
Yeah. To change course a little bit, you've worked in palliative care a long time, and it's interesting to me, there's I think a palliative care nurse, Bronnie Ware, who wrote a book about the regrets of the dying. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but what have you seen as far as both in general palliative care, and then also when people have these, mystical experiences at the end? What is the thing they say, like, oh man, I should have, what? What is it that you see?
So here we go again with the love stuff. I always half joke, or,
Sure.
these scientists going around, but we're following the data, and that's what they're telling us. So one of the things is that, one is that this may not be the only form we take. So there's some kind of comfort, and this might continue in some way. Some people have death rebirth experiences in their room, where literally a not so uncommon experience of a mystical experience on a psychedelic is a complete experience of death, and one has died.
Mm-hmm.
And then it feels reborn. Now, if you're dying in this reality, that's a profound gift as well. So, I mean, those existential insights occur. Forgiveness is a big one we hear about.
I should have forgiven him sooner, or her sooner, or whatever.
Including people you would think people have a hard time forgiving. So, someone could have treated them poorly 50, 60 years ago, and you hear forgiveness. Forgiveness towards self, more acceptance of self. The stuff that's not new to this. These aren't new, right?
Yeah.
Epiphanies. It almost confirms what we know already, but it's so hard to achieve. But they do achieve these in a very short time. Compassion towards others. People do change their lives, even in the final years of life. Treat their bodies better.
Sure.
Become, in our study, these weren't religious people per se. I mean, around half were self-identified as atheists, which is fine. It's just language, right?
Sure.
But they became more spiritual in the sense of connected to some underlying essence that might occur.
Oh,
You can use a religious language, or we cannot. It's just a language. I often talk about Edgar Allan Mitchell's trip from the moon. Do you know the story of his mystical experience? So he was an astronaut, just passed away recently. He lived out here in the Bay Area. And he was on the Apollo 14, coming back from the moon, looking out the spaceship window, seeing the moon and the stars and the sun, and began to have a naturally occurring mystical experience. It changed his life. He came back and founded an organization that for decades studied transpersonal states of awareness. And he wrote a beautiful vignette about it that's out there to find, and I often quote him when I speak. And he had a classic experience, a mystical experience of a world connected. And he says, the moon, the stars, the sun, the spaceship, my partner sitting next to me in the capsule, we're all connected. We're made of the same stuff. But the point I try to glean from that is he says the same stuff, but language is where we get tripped up.
Yeah.
Star stuff, divine stuff, it doesn't really matter.
When ineffability is one of the criteria, right? The language is bound to fail.
Right. Although I will say this, despite ineffability, what we're all stunned at, all of us doing this research, is the effort and then capacity for these people to describe it in such beautiful ways.
Yeah.
And I never tire of reading their vignettes. They were the teachers. I mean, these people in the study, they're the study. We're just giving them a medicine and witnessing. They're incredible. And their words are timeless. Timeless.
Yeah.
So it is ineffable. But humans have a way to capture ineffability, right? Look at
That's art.
Music and art and poetry. And there was a woman I often quote. She's still alive and doing great. She was an atheist. I love quoting her, and she had an incredible mystical experience. She's still an atheist, whatever that means, but said in her words, I was bathed in love, and the only way to say it in the English language is to say I was bathed in God's love. Well, I'm an atheist, so I don't want to say that, bathed in God, but there's no other language. And I love that contradiction.
Sure.
And she's great. She's great. So there's something about this wiring. It doesn't matter what language we use. Divine stuff, star stuff, they experience interconnectivity of all of matter. And that's, if you're dying, it's an incredible gift. So it's been an honor to watch these people and to be with them. And many, cultivate spiritual practices. One woman began a Zen meditation practice in a very serious way. And she said it helped her connect with the experience she had on the psilocybin that day in the session room.
Yeah. It's interesting, I think the topic of what people are actually concerned with when they're dying and is very interesting to me because it's, we still don't learn those lessons. I mean, no one ever says, man, I wish I would have got that person back good.
Right.
I wish I would have exacted my revenge. I wish I would have worked a little harder.
A little more money.
Wish I just squeezed a little more money with my soul's effort. Like nobody says that, but nonetheless, that's what we're focused on.
Keep doing
just say over and over again, and that's what we're stressed about. I wish I would have stressed more. No, nobody says that. Says no one ever.
It's remarkable.
It's
the Buddhism, the three poisons of, desire, greed, anger. I mean, you're right. Not new stuff, and you hear it told repeatedly. That's an interesting point, by the way. It brings up sustainability of these experiences. So you just pointed out a great point. Everyone has these experiences in life. I'm going to change my ways. I'm going to, and near-death experiences do that as well. And then, life is tough and fall back into the way of living that maybe you want to change.
Well, the ego self, the identity self is tenacious. It wants to exist.
Incredible. Right. But, Hopkins and we're looking at people months out from the study, and they appear to be sustained, these effects. I mean, Hopkins did a 14-month follow-up on one of their studies, and over 65%, I believe, of the patients still reported as the single most or top 5 most important spiritual or meaningful experience of their life. Rick Doblin, who organized this conference we're at, tracked down the survivors of the Good Friday study from 1962 and 1991, almost 20 years later. And the survivors still reported that experience, that one psilocybin experience, on these number of constructs, transcendence, sacredness, unity, as really high, in the 70%, high numbers, versus the controls who said it wasn't that important or meaningful. So it appears to sustain, and that's an incredible thing to understand.
Yeah.
What about is sustained? Is it the memory of it? There's something changed in the architecture of our consciousness. Are these insights so powerful? And they are. You could recall the first time you fell in love. You could tell me probably when that was, or if you had a child, or when the moment the baby was born, that experience. This has that kind of meaningfulness. It kind of gets rooted in memory in a way that is transformative, and that we're still hoping to learn more about. It's incredible.
Yeah, well, and then the ability for that's why I think it's so cool you're doing this with religious leaders, because each will have their own framework and way to kind of translate this in their own lexicon and provide even more symbol and metaphor in ways that we can kind of talk about these things. And then on the other side, in the kind of crowdsourcing side, I know I've spoken with, Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler just wrote the book Stealing Fire, great book. And they talk about something that's developed called the hyperspace lexicon, right? And then this is a collection of terms that have developed out of, really kind of the Burning Man culture and the psychedelic culture that's developed to talk about experiences that formerly didn't have words or didn't have other ways that people could express it. And it also serves a second purpose, which is if someone's having this experience, you can feel like I'm the only one in the world that's ever had this, which can be frustrating and also sometimes lead to unnecessary self-importance. Like, I've just come down from the mountain, but then you can look up in this dictionary and be like, oh, that's this thing. That's this thing. Yeah, this is exact thing is what I'm describing. And then that ends up forming a sense of unity and kind of makes you feel part of a community, and also not like, holy shit, I've got to write the new Bible.
Right.
You know what I mean? Which is, and then one of the things that I've found is I get, sometimes people know that I've had a bit of experience with psychedelics. So I'll get weird calls or texts sometimes late at night from an unusual source. And I'm like, oh, I know what's going on here. You know, something's happening. And it's generally, you know, paranoia or some area, a common area where a psychedelic experience can go south, bad set and setting.
And I want to talk about that. Yeah, I mean, there are difficult experiences.
No doubt, especially when the set and setting is random. You know,
Right.
you go to a party where everybody's drinking or doing coke, and then you're on mushrooms, and then all of a sudden it's like you're in this weird environment, and paranoia comes in. And when I tell them, they'll be describing something that very much just sounds like paranoia. People are out to get them. I'm like, oh well, I see what's happening. You're experiencing the classic, and they go, the classic. I was like, yes, the classic negative experience on one of these things. And just hearing that, it's like, oh, okay.
Right.
I'm not the only one, and this reality isn't real. But without that kind of understanding that I'm not alone, it can be really scary.
It can be very difficult, and I wanted to return to that. I'm glad you brought it up at this point. So these are not, we're talking about the transformative, incredible components of this, which are incredibly life-changing and death-changing in the one study. But the capacity to have profoundly difficult and challenging experiences as we go into our interior can't be understated. Can't be overstated. And, you know, we don't recommend this, obviously, recreationally. I mean, these are done in very careful settings. People are screened psychiatrically, medically. There are a variety of psychiatric diagnoses that would put someone at risk to have this experience.
Sure.
And as you've pointed out, there are three crucial things to get in place before an experience like this in our FDA-approved research. One is set. It's the mindset of the person, who the person is, how they're prepared, how they understand it, expectations. The next is setting, how it's done, where it's done. This is in a very safe, supportive, living room-like setting with 2 professionally trained guides. We spend a month working with them, preparing for it, presenting some guidelines, what to possibly expect if things get difficult, how to work with that. And the main advice or recommendation is to move into the experience, no matter how difficult it might be getting, as we have an encounter with ourselves or death or some difficult terrain that can come up, to move into it, to stay with it, the unfolding moment-to-moment change. And typically it transforms to something teachable and insightful. And then intention. Why are you doing that? Why is it being done? So think about difficult, or as the street language, bad trips. It's people aren't screened. So there's a lot of pre-existing illness that we're not aware of psychiatrically. They're not trained properly, they're set. And then they're in some loud, who knows where they are, right? And so incredible volume of stimuli coming in, confusing. So in that sense, they're very... they're potentially dangerous in that sense.
Yeah, it's a lot of risk. And also, if you're taking it from Jimbo, random Jimbo, and you don't really know how much you're taking, and you don't really know, the dosing is way off. And also you have that thought, like, maybe this is poison. Like you, and it sometimes is. Sometimes, unfortunately, you will get the wrong thing, or you will get too much, and it can have disastrous effects. So it's not a completely illogical. Most of the time, like you said, you just need to be guided to work through these things that are coming up, but without the assurance that, okay, what I'm doing is safe. It's the right amount. I'm safe to go through. Like, it takes incredible courage on its own. And if you're worried about this other stuff, you may just come up a little bit short for what you need to actually make this a valuable experience. So I agree. It can't be overstated or said too much that, preparing for this is psychic surgery, and you don't go to surgery with some random person with a colorful shirt and a butter knife. You know what I mean? Like, make sure you're doing this intelligently with. Well,
I want to be in the record saying I don't recommend that at all outside of what we do. There were our studies, obviously. For centuries they were done within ritualistic contexts.
Those were the surgeons of the time, right?
So the recreational use is potentially dangerous and uncertain. So we're delighted to be allowed to work within these supportive government-approved settings with potentially important medicines to help end-of-life distress, to help alcoholism, to help a host of issues potentially. And let's see how it unfolds.
Well, we have pretty good early indication how that's going to.
The end-of-life stuff is really very
how that's
promising.
going to unfold. And particularly with psilocybin, it's not so much what it's going to do, it's what it's not able to touch. What psychiatric conditions is this not helpful for? Because early indications are really showing that if you reset the master motherboard in this certain way, then a lot of downstream effects, the generation of mystical experiences or the increase in connectivity in the brain, whatever your framework is, the downstream effects are really wide ranging. I mean, you may go in to help yourself quit smoking, but you may come out having met God.
Right. And what we're finding with this religious leader study, it's consistent with the end of the cancer study.
Yeah.
So two different populations, but the experiences aren't dramatically different.
Right.
Because as you're implying, the cancer patient comes in with the intention to help die a better death, have acceptance, have less fear. Other studies come with different intentions, but often the experience is similar, right? Forgiveness, love, the important things, and often difficult encounters. I should also point out, I'd like to point out, all the experiences aren't mystical of nature, right?
Sure.
So every person in our research, across the board, UCLA, Hopkins, other sites around the world, don't have mystical experiences all the time when given a compound like this. There are a variety of levels that people could have with a compound like psilocybin. One is simply an aesthetic experience. It feels pleasant. Music sounds better when they're hearing it, right? But it's not particularly meaningful in the end. And then there's a very, potentially complicated encounter with the self, kind of like an enhanced psychoanalytic inward journey of our interior, our life. So revisiting certain autobiographical information, past relationships, things you wish you did better and didn't. So there's that can cultivate insight, but that's not mystical, but it's profoundly important as well.
Sure.
It's like a lot of psychotherapy squeezed into one. And then there's these larger, not larger, but these other levels of archetypal or mystical experience that we're talking about, this transcendence, this sense of unity. These transpersonal states, but no one knows what they're going to get, nor do we. We tell people we could cultivate intention, but we can't guarantee expectation. We take it in the best of settings. They'll be safe. You'll be safe. We're here.
The same person in the same setting with the same substance will reliably experience something different every time.
Profoundly. Yes. Studies where there are two doses of psilocybin, 4 or 7 weeks apart, have profoundly different experiences. And from transcendent to profoundly difficult and dark, and I'm not sure what that was about, but I need to do some work. And then hence the need for psychotherapy integration, to work with a trained guide and a therapist, try to understand and put together, what that was about. But there's no guarantees here.
And that's not like anything else in the psychopharmacological arsenal that we currently have. As if you're a psychiatrist and you prescribe something reliably, you're looking to get the same response every time. You take a Xanax, generally you want the anxiety to be relieved in the same way.
Right.
But this is not that game. This is a different thing.
With this, we don't know what it does exactly. The neuroscientists are doing great work. It involves serotonergic pathways and certain parts of the neurochemical system that's being activated. But it seems to shift consciousness in a way and act as a portal to some deeper realm of unconscious activity, and that's incredible. Or local consciousness, and it amplifies what's happening, and we don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
And so, hence the need for preparation. Our guides, a month getting to know them. The session is carefully planned. They wear headphones, playing a set of classical and soothing music. They wear eye shades to encourage to go within to themselves versus being distracted by this consensus reality. And they spend a full day with us. When they emerge from the experience, by 5, 6 p.m., they're back in ordinary consciousness. And we stay with them, we talk with them, we check on them, we see them the next day for a follow-up session. So it's carefully orchestrated with a kind of respect for the shifts in consciousness that, again, goes back millennia when these were used in various traditions.
Sure. Have you thought about, at a certain point, to scale and the development of AI? I know they already have some very preliminary AI for, soldiers that can basically check in. They build rapport. I forget the name of the AI engine that does it, but builds rapport, asks some very basic questions, and then leads them down some paths and some confidence building questions. I read about it in the book Stealing Fire. I can't recall the exact details, but it's this kind of preliminary form of, a psychiatrist, but as an AI. But have you thought about or looked into the implications that potentially there could be a merger there where instead of having to necessarily train, presuming fast forward to the future, psilocybin becomes legal in the conditions of, psychotherapy and having that requirement, but have an AI approved to basically guide someone through, pump in the right music, measure pupil dilation, all of the heart rate variability, all of these metrics that even the best psychiatrist doesn't have access to, and guide people down a path. Have you explored that in your mind?
Singularity here.
Yeah.
I haven't. It's fascinating, but you're way beyond me on that one. Yeah.
It seems like that could be a potential where, at that point then, because one of the models to scale that is hard is just training enough clinicians for this. Because the need, you talk about all these things, any one of these things, alcoholism, cessation of cigarettes, major depression, PTSD, all right, we're talking about a lot of the country now. And then you're going to need a lot of therapists. But if they were able to work in, and, obviously you'll have to prove it in clinical study that with enough training, obviously guided by the wisdom of people like yourself, that you could coach AI and AI could learn well enough to be able to guide someone through, well, then all of a sudden you have scale. As presuming that you can produce the molecule in enough quantity, which we're clever monkeys. I think we could probably figure that out. Right. And then all of a sudden shifts could happen amazingly fast. Island. Hey,
no.
We made it. We made it, Tony. We made it to Island.
You've got me. You're a year ahead. I'm still stuck in the beauty of two humans having this experience together. Yeah. AI, we're about to reach some point, though, apparently, right? A couple of years.
Yeah.
It's years away from a breakthrough in terms of where they are. But I'm not the right person to talk about AI.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not the right person either, but it's definitely a field, especially with the initial application for the soldiers and them developing it. It's not fully smart AI like you see that's going to rapidly develop towards the singularity, but it's intelligent enough that it has enough feedback engines and has enough options that it can.
I guess the larger question is, can we really replicate empathy and support and the warmth and the essence of what it means to be human in a positive way?
Yeah.
In AI, and again, I have zero knowledge of where that's going, but that's the important part of these sessions. The role of empathy and as you say, holding the space, being there and intuiting where the person is. Again, we're just much of the session. We're not doing that much if it's going well. They're lying down, having this incredible experience, maybe a complex, difficult experience, and we're sitting there just observing and being with them without words. Trying to intuit where they are, when to check in, how to support them. I don't know how that happens in AI, but again... And
it won't ever be quite the same, right? Because you could hold an AI robot, you're never going to get an oxytocin response.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's the energy that you can actually measure from the heart field. This is not something woo-woo, it's measurable. Yeah. There's a measurable energy field emanating from the human heart or the core. You're not going to be able to duplicate that, but you might be able to duplicate some pretty good guidance because people can have solid experiences on their own. Potentially, but there will always be a space. I'm not one of those people that says, technology will figure it all out, because there's something special and irreplicable about humanity.
I would think so.
I hope so. Maybe we're wrong.
I certainly hope so.
I feel so, but I'm biased. I'm human. So
It's sort of like with this. The research neuroscientifically is wonderful.
Yeah.
But will there be a biological reductionism where we know exactly what's causing this mystical experience? I'm not sure. We're going to learn more over the next decades. Yeah. These scientists doing the work are incredible, the brain science stuff. But if I put you in a PET scan, an MRI, some kind of imaging machine, and show you pictures of things you love or people you love, and certain parts of your brain, as they say, light up, get activated. It's more complex than that. Does that mean we can harness and bottle? No, right? There's a mystery how it gets, right?
Yeah.
What is love? So
maybe correlations, variety of correlations,
that I think,
but not causation.
That I think we are doing already, and
Yeah.
I think the neuroscience will lead there, because it's the final frontier, isn't it? Consciousness.
Yep. I'd say so. And a good one to explore.
I'll agree with you on that. Yeah,
I'm happy we're in this field.
It's the only one to.
I like the ocean too. I like space, but consciousness
Space
to me
is
is
great.
most interesting.
But this is actually, I'm going to show a slide tomorrow of the Edgar Mitchell thing and the planets and the moon, and outer space travel is incredible. But the most complex, beautiful journey is the one in the interior.
Indeed, it is, my
And
friend.
mapping out that landscape. So.
Beautiful. Anything you want to point people to? Anything? Any awareness of any published works or any websites or anything that people can go check out?
Not right now. I mean, I think I'd like people to understand that we did publish these findings in December of 2016 in the Journal of Psychopharmacology, and they were groundbreaking results along with Johns Hopkins showing that one dose, one psilocybin session produced incredible results, upward of 80% reductions in depression, anxiety, and a host of distress measures in people with cancer. And I think from that, there's promise for these medicines and this research and more clinical trials to really establish further establish safety and efficacy, but also the lessons learned from it, that we have the capacity to die better deaths. As we say in palliative care, kind of a strange combination of words, a good death. With integrity, meaning, and that's within reach, as difficult as it sounds.
Yeah.
And people without these medicines have good deaths too. Palliative care and hospice has been doing this for years.
Yep.
There are ways to have meaning-making experiences. And research shows that meaning at the end of life and transcendence are buffers against existential distress. And so those findings lay the rationale for our research. Then how do we cultivate meaning and transcendence? Maybe one possible way is through these medicines that induce these mystical experiences. I'd like people to know that. And yeah.
Beautiful.
That's it for now.
Well, thank you for your work,
Thank
my
you.
friend.
It was a nice
It's been a fun conversation.
It's great.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. See you, everybody.